Ah, what a lovely summer beach day. My wife, my kids, out here in this 110-degree weather here in Texas in our lovely and appropriate beach wear. My wife is out taking care of the kids as she should, and I get to sit here drinking 3 quarts of scotch and reading a fantastic brand new novel, The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Finally a break from the whipping and whapping of the business world us men have to deal with. Hey, look, a lovely housewife with children and a husband who loves her and buys her things. What a fantastic start. Oh, looks like this woman is hanging out with a man she's not supposed to. He must be the bad guy. Well, she's obviously entwined by his hypnotic glare. She's pretty comfortable with this man. She's really comfortable with this man. Wait a minute. What is autonomy? Self-determination? What in the Sam heck is going on with this book? Why is she so comfortable doing all this wrangling and wrestling of her own artwork and friendships and seeing other men? What in the Sam heck is going on with this book? What in the Samwise Gamgee? What in the Samuel Tarley is going on with this book?
Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. Then someone will say, what is lost can never be saved. Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage.
Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a... Oh, hey, thank you for joining me today. My name is Punkey Doodles. Today we're going to discuss a book called The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Chopin? 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 I don't know. We love Kate. Kate's great. We adore Kate. So jumping right into it. Well, no, not jumping right into it. I'm going to complain first. I have to pull fucking my own focus on my camera. So as fucked as my production already is, it's going to be worse from now on. And I also promised to do a bunch of videos and book reviews this summer, and that's just like, fuck that. That did not happen. Back to The Awakening. This book came out in 1899. When it came out, it was like considered like horrible, like what a fucking ridiculous book. No one should take it seriously. And then later, like about 50 years later, after I think it's like second wave feminism, people looked at this book and they're like, this is a pretty good book on feminism. Now, I actually got into this book because I was reading a bunch of books that I'm reading. They tend to be about men and males and their perspective, and they were the modernist books, so Hemingway and shit like that. And I was like, I should try something else, like from a woman's perspective. And so I got this. It didn't look like too big of a commitment, and there was a lot of sort of controversy based on the meaning of this book, The Awakening, in that, you know, it's a feminist book, for sure. It's a book about feminism. But to be used as a political ideology of feminism is kind of interesting, because it kind of isn't. But before we get into that, I'll just describe to you
the author,
and then the book, and then we'll talk about some of the symbology and why this book would be good to read and write a project on, or just good in your everyday life. As you can see, it's a pretty thin book. I think 115 pages, super dense. The chapters are like a page and a half each, so there's a lot of opportunity to start and stop if you're struggle to read like me. Good book, good book, good book. That's my review of it. Can't really say anything about that, right? Okay, let's bust out the old no-to. So I guess we can just get into the plot of The Awakening. We can talk more about Kate at another time. I actually really want to read her short stories because she was so renowned at the time, and The Awakening is so good. So yeah, we'll start with the plot. We open up on Edna Pontellier. What the fuck am I doing? I missed a very, very crucial part of my videos. What the fuck? Spoilers! Spoiler! Alert! It's a spoiler alert! Oh god, I can't believe I almost missed that. That's fucking embarrassing. That's embarrassing, guys. That's Okay, so we're going on the main character. Sorry to spoil a character. Before I gave you the alert, I did spoil the name, Edna Pontellier. So it's set in southern Louisiana, mostly in New Orleans, but we actually open on this place called Grand Isle, which I think is east of New Orleans, which is kind of like a vacation destination resort where we go fishing and chill, beaches, you know, it's a good time. But anyway, it's in the south, so like all the characters are like French descendants or have like French names, so I'm going to get a lot of the names wrong. Pretty interesting. It's one of those fun aspects of the book where like there's a lot actually in French, and the translation I have, or the copy I have, the edition I have, I guess, gives some translations to like some of the phrases and things, but not always. I kind of felt like a little lost, but you know, Google's your friend. It's not that much. It's like every once in a while it's a thing, but it's not like a big fucking thing. Anyway, Edna Pontellier has her two kids. Can't remember their names. They're not that important. They're vacationing in Grand Isle on this like little complex of like cottages that have like their own little wooden boardwalk, and they're all neighbors and they're really close, and they have like one communal area. So it's kind of like a hotel, motel, cabin sort of thing on the beach. And her husband is there, sort of. And then there's a bunch of other people living with them. And Edna is a young woman in her like mid-20s basically. And she starts hanging out with this dude named Robert Lebrun. The Lebruns actually run this like motel strip that they're staying in. And he's like working, keeping things up to date. He works, I think, for their mom, and there's another brother named Victor. But Robert is a sweetheart. He charms the hell out of Edna, and they just go hang out all the time. She wants to learn to swim, so he takes her out to the ocean and they swim. The kids go out and play with all the other kids that are staying there. And then you have Edna's husband. His name's Léonce Pontellier. Fucking cool name. That is a crisp name. Léonce Pontellier. He's a big old greasy businessman from New Orleans. He's like a finance guy. Finance bro. And he kind of just spends, like, he's like, sees Edna running off with Robert, and he's like, whatever, she's an idiot. I'm doing big brain money shit. So he's like looking at the paper all the time and is looking at stocks, and then he like doesn't want to hang out on their vacation. Like he constantly goes to the city to like work still, and then he's like going out to the nightclub to play pool and get drunk every night, and he's kind of like salty and sour that Edna doesn't want to like accept that lifestyle. She's kind of like annoyed that he doesn't like do anything, but it's also pretty clear that she and Robert are very like intimately, it's not that they're like banging or anything, it's not like that, nowhere near like that. They just mesh really well, and she starts to kind of realize what's up, and then I think he starts to realize, because he gets up one day and he's like, I actually have a business proposition in Mexico, and I'm gonna fucking bail and work on this business thing. Who knows if I ever come back? So obviously Robert's worried that him getting entangled with a married woman will just kind of like lead to heartbreak. And so he bails, and this breaks Edna's heart. So she goes back to New Orleans and is just trying to cope with life now without Robert, and kind of where she was at the point of him leaving, because he symbolically represented a time of her being happy. The same way her kids could run around and play, she would run around and play with Robert, like they're little kids. And now she like has this, and like symbolically she learned to swim and is doing all these things and is encouraged to sketch her like art from her like past and stuff. So she wants to kind of continue living her life this way. The Pontelliers are like kind of almost very much upper class. They have a bunch of servants, they have a really nice house, and Léonce, he's like pretty well regarded, but he's like super obsessed with his image and how he's like perceived by those around him, because he's very insecure about his wealth. He really wants to like broadcast that he is successful. That's very important to him. And part of that is like, hey Edna, like you have to like hang out with the other housewives like while I'm at work. You have to go and do the shit so that socially people know how great we are. Léonce is the one who like buys art for the house, and he's like, this will go here, take this down, like put this new set of china up. He's like, you have to act accordingly, and Edna's very much like a placeholder in this fucking life he's trying to broadcast. But because of her newfound awakening, she wants to disregard that. She was with Robert, she fell in love with Robert, but she fell in love with play as well. So she starts shirking her responsibility. She doesn't want to go for social meetings with the other housewives. She doesn't want to fucking keep up the house. She wants to hang out with the people she likes and her like the activities that fulfill her. Eventually this kind of frustration keeps building and building and building, and Léonce doesn't really know what to do with her. He tries taking her to a doctor or talking to a doctor about her, and the doctor's like, just chill, just relax, it's okay. And he's like, well, I'm just going to give her some space. I'm going to go to New York for business, so you hang out. And then Edna's like, that sounds great to me, bro. And actually, I'm going to send my kids to your parents' place so that I have the house to myself. So the kids are out of town, they're in the country, and they're living life. They're having a lot of fun. They're playing too. So it's not that she's like super neglectful of them or anything. She's just like really taking the opportunity that her overbearing husband, who keeps like perpetuating like this social status thing on her, is gone. She can like send the kids away, and then she can focus on herself. While they're all away and she's there at the house, she's like kind of realizes like this whole house is a facade of like what kind of life I want. This is Léonce's house, and it's optimized for people's perception of him, and it's like also just like a place for my kids to grow up. It's not really for me. And since they're all going to be away for months and months and months, she's like, I'm just going to shut down the house and move into an apartment. So that way we don't have to have the servants cleaning every inch of it every day because no one's going to be using it. You know, so it's kind of a logical thing, but it's clearly driven by like her wanting to cut her own path in life. So she gets this house, and her and her friend, or this apartment, and her and her friends nickname this apartment the Pigeon House. She is still desperately in love with Robert. She is constantly trying to find any way of contact with her. She has a friend. She's kind of this bitter old hag lady named Mademoiselle Reyes, I think. And she's a bit of like an outcast herself. She lives alone as far as I remember. And she's a pianist. She's a really good pianist, but she's like rude and fucking mean to everyone, and no one like likes her. Edna sort of is like super down with her because she's like does her own thing, right? She loves to play the piano, and she really encourages Edna to like work on your art, work on yourself, do what I did. Like, yeah, I might seem bitter and lonely, but I like feel somewhat fulfilled. And in that, she's the only one in contact with Robert, who's in Mexico. And so Edna's like in love with Robert. She can't stop thinking about him. And then she's not getting any mail from Robert. It's quite like hurtful. And then she finds out that Robert is mailing Mademoiselle Reyes. She actually is, well, she's like scorned by this. She's like, why the fuck would Robert, like we had such a connection, why would Robert not try and reach out to me? Reyes just lets her read the letters anyway, and the letters are just like Robert standing Edna. Like they love each other, and he separated himself, and he is not talking to her, and it's like breaking her heart. But she's kind of like, I just knowing that he loves me is good enough for me. We'll go from there, we'll move forward. And she sort of does. So she's like moving into her pigeon house, and she meets this guy named Alcide Arobin, who's known as a player. He's like a fucking horny devil kind of guy. He gets around, he fucks a little, you know, he's a dude. Everyone knows about him, he has his game, and you know, Léonce isn't even fucking around. He starts like kind of courting her. Alcide, he knows. He's like, Edna just got her own fucking place, bruh. She got her own fucking place. Her husband's out of town. The kids aren't in the picture, bro. I want to fucking hook up. And he keeps trying to hit up Edna, and she kind of keeps blowing him off, but she's like a little like horny. There's no sign that Robert's going to come back. And so she actually gives in and lets Elsie Arobin hit. They smash, and you know, it's kind of like whatever. He like is obsessed with her. He comes by way too much. He is too down for that. And she's just like, this is like getting weird. And she's like obviously a little bit worried because like Elsie has this reputation and everyone sees him coming over and hanging out. Like it's a little dicey. She eventually like reaches out to Leonce, who's in New York, and she's like, hey, by the way, I've shut down the house and I'm going to like just stay in this apartment until further notice. So she's kind of like, she's like pretty well communicating like, hey, our relationship is on the fucking rocks, bro. You need to like, something needs to change. And his fucking response is pretty Chad, I would say. It's and he like mails back and he's like, fuck you, we're just gonna say that like we're renovating the house. And so like he's like, I've already fucking called like the best builders in town, we're redoing the house to my precise definitions, that is the reason why you've moved out, if anyone asks. So he like makes it known that they're doing renos and shit like that. They're like, damn, this guy like really cares about his image. He thought really quickly on his feet. He just got this letter like, my life is fucked, I don't know if I want to be with you. And he's like, well, here's a good cover story. Anyway, he doesn't even give a fuck. He does not give a fuck that she's not happy. That she clearly has an apartment that she's using to like build her own new life, right? Like Leonce is just, he does not give a fuck. And she's kind of like hooking up with Elsie now and again. She's like hanging out with her friends and doing her own thing, but she's not keeping up with social appearances. She goes to visit her kids, like I think once, but maybe more than once they suggest. She definitely like keeps in contact. She loves her kids, but like, you know, having kids is kind of inconvenient for a life, especially if you're just trying to like establish who you are. She like hangs out with her kids and it's quite nice. She plays with them. I think that's a big part, is like when she visits her kids, she doesn't have to be a mother because her like in-laws are the parents in that situation. She gets to play with them. She gets to talk with them. She kind of gets on their level. And it's quite a beautiful scene. I kind of wish it was longer, but anyway. She's living her life and she goes on and she like has like a close relationship with Reyes. She like kind of goes over to hang out, and if they're not there, they like have a key that she knows about, so she just like goes and hangs out in the house. And so she's just hanging out in this house waiting for her friend, and then someone comes to the door and it's Robert. Robert has come back from Mexico. So like Edna's like peeved in fucking general that Robert has not reached out to her after like having such a intense intimacy over the last summer. This is like months later, by the way. Maybe even like almost a year later. Robert, he's shocked. He's like, oh shit, like fuck, Edna, what are you doing here? And she kind of like gives it to him. She's like, what the fuck is your problem, motherfucker? Why did you not talk to me once? Why did you not do fucking shit? And you know, he's dancing around it like, it was a little too weird. You're married. I was feeling too many feelings at the time. Like, it wasn't good. It wasn't a good situation. Edna's like, motherfucker, I have built my life so that is not a thing anymore. We can be together and be happy. But Robert's still like, oh, it's a little out of whack. And it's not until that he sees that she's like hanging out with Elsie Arobin that like, he's like, what the fuck? You're hanging out with this horn dog? That must mean you two are fucking. Like, what has happened? What has changed? Like, you know, he's obviously like a little miffed that she's hanging out with a guy she's probably fucking, but he's also kind of like, oh shit, it's different. Okay, and she's way more outspoken or whatever, but he keeps kind of swerving her. He's like, he's still bound by like societal expectations. Like her husband's out of town, she's like clearly like giving him the go ahead, like plane landing, like come on, let's go, Robert. But he's still not really dealing with it, and eventually they kind of keep running into each other, and it kind of goes back to the intimacy that they had in Grand Isle at the beginning of the book. But now she's like fully down to like have sexual experiences, and she like explicitly wants to be with Robert. She like guides him into the pigeon house and is like, let's fucking do this, Robert. Let's fucking bang. And he's like, all right, let's go. But then they get an emergency interruption. A servant knocks on the door and is like, hey, your friend Mademoiselle Ratignol? I don't know how you'd say her name. Anyway, she's kind of like the good wife who's like always telling Edna like, you should like care for your kids. You should like make your house good. She's having another baby, and she's like asking for Edna's support, like while she's having the baby, which is like a little bit weird because it's like, what's Edna gonna do? She's just gonna sit there. But she's like, you know, I have this friend, like, Robert, will you please wait? Like, just, I'll be back. Wait here at my apartment. I don't want this to be over. And Robert's like, don't go. But then he's like, fine, just go. I'll wait. She goes to see her friend, Adele Ratignol, and she's having a hard time giving this baby. And yeah, everyone's kind of like, Edna, why are you here? The doctor's like, there's no reason for you to be here. Just like, go away. She stays, and her friend is like delirious as she's giving birth, and she just keeps telling her, like, think about the children, and like just focus on a moral life in that sense. Whatever. Hours pass, and she goes back home, and she's like, oh fucking, I'm gonna get a slice of that Robert cake tonight. And she gets there, and Robert's gone. And there's a note saying that he's leaving forever, that he can't reconcile his love for Edna and the fact that she's like married, and that there's no way they could be together in the way that she wants. So Edna is fucking devastated. She was devastated when he went away to Mexico, and she knew where he was, right? But the fact that he just fucking bailed when he had that fucking close. She had that fucking Robert cake so close. And so she's fucked. She cannot believe this. She almost had him. She almost succeeded. She had carved a life for herself, was living for herself, and almost had a partner who would accept that and bring her like a joy that she'd never known, and he runs away. And so the story actually ends on a little bit of an ambiguous note. She returns to Grand Isle, distraught, completely alone, with no plans to stay there. It's like still not in the season to like go in the summer. She goes there, and then she strips down completely naked. She's in the sun completely naked. And then she goes into the ocean, and then presumably her intent is for her to kill herself. And then that's it. That's the story. That is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Quite a sad story. It's about frustration and all that, but yada 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 yada. Okay. There's a lot to talk about with this book, because it is about women, specifically Edna, but all women, going through life trying to decide whether or not they should or should not obey what society has dictated that they should obey. First thing we're going to talk about is, what is marriage? So marriage historically was a bond between two groups of people. You watch Game of Thrones, it's about the merging of families and then alliance building. It became more about demonstrating like commitment, so rather than having men who can marry everyone and anyone and get anyone hooked up, you kind of can define like, this is a bloodline, this is like where kids come from, it has to be from these two parents, and this guy is obligated to provide for her, and she is obligated to like make sure their house is in order. That's kind of like the loose concept of marriage, especially what we're dealing with in this book. But in doing so, the commitment isn't only just to give to that, to contribute to a relationship, it's also to restrict yourself from most other kinds of relationships. So the kinds of relationships that are allowed once you're in a marriage are like business, financial. You're allowed to invest and work with people to make a business or whatever. You're allowed to, the same way that you're allowed to like provide for your wife, right? Like if you're your partner, you're allowed to have friends, so you're allowed to like party and have a good time with other people. You're allowed to trust others, you're allowed to confide in others, but you're not allowed to like be too close. Like there's a certain line you cross. The sex of the other person that you're a friend with really matters, especially in this case. Like if you're a woman with a man and you're friends, there is some strong implications that you are kind of fucking with the marriage commitment, the presiding relationship over all other relationships. You have a man and a woman in this case. You have partner X, partner Y, and they're together, and then once there's crossing of lines, then those are infract. Anyway, you kind of get what I mean, is that the marriage is the big one, and then all other relationships are sort of dictated from that point forward. So in Edna's case, marriage also includes like an obligation to keeping the house well in like a physical and metaphorical way. So like, from Leonce's perspective, like it's her Edna's responsibility to maintain friendships and relationships with other higher status families, women and men, and since she's not working, she can have the time to like take care of the kids, take care of the house, make sure it's clean. I mean, she obviously has like servants and shit like that, like she doesn't have to put that much effort into it. But then also the big one is like going to social events, going to tea, going to dinners or luncheons or whatever. Like that's her job, is doing that shit. And Leonce's job is to go work and make money, and so that's what the marriage is. That's that. Now the problem that Edna has is like she can't be true to herself. Leonce doesn't want to be close to her in the way that Robert is. So she needs to find some sort of relationship otherwise that crosses the line. Unfortunately, I like this book isn't like Edna. Like, it's not so much fucking Edna like hating her husband as she is just like feeling trapped. And Leonce doesn't even like really do much that is like fucking vile and despicable. It's just that he's like super neglectful. He's like not really chill. He doesn't give a fuck. Like not even like he's like. He's just not like aware of like what she's going through. He's just like super selfish and super like into his own thing. He's like, I need to do this, to do this, to do this. His priority is always his like social and business acceptance among his peers. Like it's not even like he wants to be wealthy so he can buy cool things and do fun shit. He just wants to be appreciated by others around him. So it's all about that. And he does not consider that Edna has anything contrary to that, but she does. So marriage is one of those things that she has to cross from, and it's kind of, you know, based on the title, it's called The Awakening. There's a sedating effect that you see on, like, say, her friend Madame Ratignolle, who is just like, marriage, do the wifely things, be a mom, like, just focus on this. Where she is like, it's a narcotic spell where you have to do the thing no matter what, and just if you think about it, then it's gonna suck. So Edna awakens from that, right? Obviously, so from her marriage, and the marriage is just a constraint for her. A big running symbol throughout is birds and cages. So she is like one of the first symbols you see is a parrot in a cage, and she's kind of squawking really, really aggressive things at people. That's kind of where Edna's at. She's in a marriage and she doesn't fucking like it. She throws her wedding ring, she fights with Leonce, and Leonce is just like, chill, bitch. Like, I'm gonna go to the club and get drunk. Like, just calm yourself. And kind of contrary to that, there's kind of two foils. Is Mademoiselle Reyes. I don't think she was married, like, ever, maybe? Or maybe she's a widow or something like that. But she's not married now, and she has, like, no intention of, like, finding another partner. She's doing her thing that way. And then there's Robert. Actually, there's also Elsie. So they're not married either. They're men who are kind of, like, in the ideal situation that Edna wants to be in. And so Elsie kind of takes advantage of it by, like, sexually fulfilling himself, and Robert kind of takes it, he's getting like romantic fulfillment. Now it's also important to know that Robert is not just some white fucking knight. He has a reputation of like being into married women. He does it to himself. It's not like Edna was this one like outlier. He like goes out of his way. Maybe because it's like safe, where you can just like trust that like the relationship borders will never like cross. You can like play and flirt and do all that, but you know, it won't ever come to like the big shit, but unfortunately it does with Edna. Okay, so that's, I guess, how we can discuss marriage, is that it's like kind of entrapping and sedating. If you're going to be married in this setting, in 1899 New Orleans, in the upper class, you are obligated to do a lot, and you are also obligated to not do certain things. Now let's talk about being a parent. This is where Mademoiselle Ratignolle kind of comes in, because she's always kind of like there, and Edna's like close friends with her. She likes her, and she's kind of like her way into like the social sphere that Leonce always wants Edna to be a part of. Ratignolle is like super into it. She's like, this is fun. We get to have fucking tea and lunch and do this and that and the other thing. And she's constantly reminding Edna, like, look, you gotta be a fucking mom. You have kids. You know, whatever bridge you want to cross or whatever, you have kids. It doesn't matter. That's another like cage that you have. It's like, okay, marriage is one thing. I guess you can cheat. Ratignolle does not have this perspective, but kind of like generally that's like the thing is like, I guess you can cheat. if you're like not fulfilled, but you can't get divorced, you can't make shit rough at home, you have kids, they need to like have a good experience growing up if you care and love for them, right? The unfortunate thing that Edna has is like, look, I like my kids. The kids are cool. I have no problem with my kids. It's just that to be a mom, I have to give up who I am. She's kind of, it doesn't like explicitly say, but she's kind of got the perspective that like, she wasn't ready to have kids. She should have gone through her awakening before this. Maybe she would have been a good mom. Maybe she still ultimately would have the kids that she has, and would work well with them. She just bought into the system too soon and didn't have a chance to be herself. She didn't have her awakening before she had the kids, but now she's like burdened by the kids, unfortunately. I'll read a little quote. She has these discussions repeatedly with Reyes and Ratignolle, and she argues with Ratignolle about like what it means to be a parent, a mother, and she says, I would give up the unessential. I would give my money. I would give my life for my children, but I would not give myself. I can't make it more clear. It's only something which I am beginning to comprehend, which is revealing itself to me. That's like one of the big themes of the book, is like, she would give all of her money, she would give all of her material resources in life for her kids, and she would give her life for her kids. She would die for them. So her relationship to the material world, she considers that her like obligation to her children. But the integrity of her soul and her identity is not something worth sacrificing for your kids. Now that was kind of the big thing that made the Awakening so controversial when it came out, is even today in 2022, it's kind of implied that a mother is only about her kids. Like you would think like, well, okay, you have a hobby of like going like sculpting 3 times a week and you have a kid, maybe you can go 1 day a week, right? Like you have to focus on your kids, right? Maybe you don't do anything for a couple of years till they're older and then you can retake up your hobby. But Edna is like, no. I am who I am, and if I'm not who I am, then I'm just like not being true to myself. I mean, she doesn't make this argument in this book, but I think you could make the argument in general that to be a good mother, you have to be who you are. You have to show your kids that their identity matters, and you can't allow anyone else. And we have this notion that kids are super important because we're trying to raise them up. They're super vulnerable and you need to raise them up, but they are still just people. You would not find someone on the street, you would not find a cousin and like just give up every aspect of your life to like care for them. It's good to care for them. You can care for them in some way. You can care for them extensively, but you should not just like wreck who you are for them. So that means hobbies. So for Edna, that's her sketching, her artistic exploits, but also her romantic exploits, her sexual exploits. All of those things make up who she is. So that's kind of what it is. And Adele Ratignolle, she's always kind of like, think of the children. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? And she's like, I am thinking about the children. Fortunately, she's in a situation where she's got like wealthy in-laws that she can send the kids to. Like the kids are taken care of. The kids are okay. And it's an unfortunate contrast of like kids get to play and adults don't. Like it's frustrating for Edna, where she's like, these kids are fucking having the best time of their life. Why can't I have the best time of my life? Like they're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to be fucking miserable to have your kids have a good lifestyle. In fact, that probably would make things worse. So I want to talk about 3 forms of fulfillment that Edna kind of goes through. So there's artistic/spiritual fulfillment. She's friends with Mademoiselle Reyes, who is an amazing pianist. She plays like fucking no one else. She fucking burns the keys, bro. And she keeps encouraging Edna to revisit her old hobby of sketching or stuff. Robert did the same early in the book. He's like, look, you're really good at this, you should focus on it and make it a thing. And she starts spending more and more time, and she like goes, instead of like going over for like social activities, she like will hang out with friends and just like sketch them. Like that's what she turns her life into, is like she works on her work and not building up her husband's social presence. Now Reyes also represents the consequences of doing that, where she's isolated. No one really likes her. She lives her life for herself, so she's opinionated, so no one wants to be with her. She's an outcast, she's alone, and Edna's constantly poised with, like, if shit got wild, if, you know, you really committed to leaving Leonce to pursue your own life, would you want to live like Reyes? And, you know, it's not even much of a conflict there. She's kind of like, Reyes is dope. She, like, says what she wants, she does what she wants. She might not even be fully happy, but she at least has got it, you know what I mean? That's kind of that there. She like, when she wasn't fulfilled, she was asleep. It wasn't until she started doing her artistic stuff and seeing that art can be a beautiful and amazing thing. Her relationship with music too, like Reyes starts playing these crazy music that she just gets lost into. At first she's just like thinking about 20 other things while the music's going on, but then the music plays and she just falls into it. She becomes one with it. And that's kind of like where you need to be with your art. If you're focused on your marriage and being a parent and you can't do the thing that makes you, then you're not really living a happy life. All right, let's go to romantic fulfillment. I guess, does a relationship, as we define with marriage, does it equal financial and sexual and romantic fulfillment? Does a marriage have to be that? Does a defined relationship have to be all of those things? Or can you have like a separation of all those things? So like Robert, he's a very intimate guy. He's kind of the guy that Edna wants to be a companion with. It's different from sexual identity. She obviously wants to hook up with him, but she was able to like have really meaningful contact with Robert in the summer before sex was even part of the equation. Robert really represents like what life could be, just being supported and like just being loved and adored. That kind of like raw emotion. It's just like a constant beam of like romance, right? Like the connection. Robert's a really interesting character, the more I think about him, because he's a foil to Edna in that Edna does what he can't do and learn to deal with the borders that are entrenched in life. He keeps running away from the relationship. He's not really being a man, like in the sense of like, take what you want, be independent and stuff like that. He's a coward every time. Like when it gets too far, at the beginning of the book, he runs away to Mexico for some bullshit reason. And then when he literally has Edna, he literally is in her apartment, they're like, we're gonna fuck well, it's gonna be awesome, and this is our life from now on. They like literally have that conversation. And then she goes and he kind of like, maybe he has the post-nut clarity from nutting in his pants or whatever, but he's like, oh shit, I cannot do this. And so he won't allow himself to be romantically fulfilled, and by doing that, he blocks Edna from being romantically fulfilled. It's quite tragic, and that might be like the number one thing. Interestingly enough, we're going to compare it to the sexual fulfillment next. So we have like the artistic fulfillment, the romantic fulfillment. We're going to discuss the sexual fulfillment, and then talk about like the financial fulfillment. But the romantic one seems to be the big one. The one that makes you the happiest is the line you cannot cross the most. Robert won't let it happen. Now let's go to the sexual one. We have Alcee Arobin, who's like the fucking horn dog. He's the guy, he just goes and smashes like non-stop, and he does not give a fuck. He does not give a fuck. But he also just doesn't give a fuck in that, like, he confuses his sexual identity with romance. It's really fucking funny, because he lays it on thick. He like tries to smash Edna so much, and she finally lets him hit. And then he's like showing up every fucking day, non-fucking stop. It just never ends. She said something really fun actually about him. She lit a candle and went up to her room. Alcee Arobin was absolutely nothing to her, yet his presence, his manners, the warmth of his glances, and above all the touch of his lips upon her hand had acted like a narcotic upon her. So she doesn't like him. She doesn't want him around, but she's like, you know what? If I'm gonna be true to myself, I kind of like the way he makes my booty shake. She kind of gives in. She gives in to that before she can give in to Robert. Like that's the lines we're dealing with. Like the most physical, debaucherous thing you can do in a marriage is cheating, right? And she does it before she can like really like romantically cheat. Like it's like wild that like we have Alcee Arobin who's like does not give a fuck. He's just like Robert in that he keeps pursuing women, but he pursues them for sexual purposes, and Robert pursues them for romantic purposes. But Robert can't handle it. He's kind of a bitch. He just cannot deal with it. And Alcee's just such a horn dog that he confuses romance with his sexual identity. Like he's like, I'm in love with you, Edna, and Edna's like, you just have a boner, man. Like that's, and it's kind of their relationship over and over and over again. And the second Robert comes back, she like throws him away. Like, sexual identity is important to Edna, and she wants to have a good time, which is fair, but it's like not everything. Like, it's like the second romance comes up as like an alternative, she's like, fuck you, Arobin, go the fuck away, you suck, Robert's better than you. It doesn't even, like, she doesn't even bang Robert, and she's like chooses him. She's like the sexual identity is important, but it's really not as big a factor. Which I think is like poses a really interesting thing for the Awakening, is that it's like positioning being like independent womanhood is not just being fucking horny. Like it is a multi-dimensional fucking thing. Being horny is part of it, but it's not all of it. It's not even like that significant of a fucking thing. She was never mad at Leonce for like not slinging dick, right? Like that was not a problem that at least that I perceived. They had children, so shit obviously went down at least a couple times. But yeah, like she has Arobin like on a fucking leash. He is ready to go all the time, and she doesn't take advantage of that. She's just like, you're hot, you're cool, whatever, let's go. Anyway, enough about that. Then we're going to talk about a fourth dimension to relationships and love and independence, and that's financial. And that's also going to bleed into theme that I don't see a whole lot of people talk about this book, but it's like pretty fucking heavy-handed, at least when I'm reading it. So it's going to be the financial fulfillment of a relationship. Again, reminder, we have the artistic/spiritual, we have the romantic, and then the sexual, and then we have the financial aspect, which is Leonce. Now, Leonce, he's kind of the fucking man. He kind of provides like crazy, but he provides way too much. He has way too much say in their life. Edna is financially provided for. They have an awesome house, they have servants, everything that they could ask for, right? But he doesn't give her a say in any of it. Theoretically, in a marriage, when I'm thinking about like what a marriage should, resources come in, and then you work together to use those resources to build a life that you want. Even in a situation where you have one income coming into a marriage, the marriage comes in and is a pool. And that's like the concept of divorce, is like everything that comes in needs to be split in half when you leave. But that's not how Leonce treats it. He is the full provider, and he is the full decider of that finance. He does not let Edna decide anything for like their household, their material goods. He buys her the dresses she's got to wear. He buys the art that she is going to see on the walls every day. He's like weirdly into the decor of his house in a way that I haven't seen like a lot of other men described in books of this era. Is like he's all about materialism. It's all about that. And again, he's like the decider of the finance. She is financially provided for, but she does not have the financial fulfillment that theoretically she should have. Now let's talk about some more of the consumerism and then the status. So we know that image matters in Leonce. Now for Leonce, everything is a possession, including Edna. So when Edna starts acting up, acting a fool and being, throwing her wedding ring and not doing what she wants to do, he goes to a doctor and he's like, yo, my woman is making a weird noise when I start her up. Like, what should I do? He like is talking to her like she's a machine that needs to be fixed, and the doctor kind of is like, dude, Leonce, chill. You can't decide and dictate when she like feels happy or sad. Like that's not a thing that you do. Like just give her space and time. Now he talks about her as like, eventually she'll come around and be a good housewife and love you forever and ever and do exactly what you say all the time. That's kind of the doctor's perspective. But he brings in a pretty poignant opinion of like, Leonce, I can't do anything for her. She's just not happy right now. It's okay. So that action, I think, just like really beautifully summed up Leonce and kind of like how Edna and Kate views marriage, and kind of the husband side is like, the husband has all the power. Like, not even that he's like fighting with another power. It's not like a battle of wills between Leonce and Edna. It is like Leonce is the total dominator. He's God. He knows the house is what he wants it to be. The relationship is what he wants it to be, and not much of a choice there. Now going from that, the concept of the house is a very important symbol, and the consumerism that comes with it is just absolutely crazy. This is obviously a book about feminine identity and power and integrity, and it's beautifully written, and it comes from a time where like not many people are willing to put this opinion as out there as Kate did. But if we're talking about what the critical stance the Awakening has, it is more critical on consumerism than it is about like feminist ideology. ideology. Like, I really don't see how you could argue it alternatively. Like, I'm not saying that Kate is like taking a socialist perspective or whatever. She's just critical of like the absurd consumerism where it's all about profit seeking and material like wealth, where this kind of conquest has like warped what society's requirements are, like what a woman should be, like how she's constantly sent to like go do this, go do that, go have build the social functions and shit like that. When it's like, dude, like we talked about the 4 fulfillments of marriage. Only one of them is financial, right? They're sexual, romantic, and artistic / spiritual. Like, so much more to life. There's so much more to life than the financial side of things. But Léonce is completely dominated by that. And the whole society, that the structure that she lives in is based on that. Like, Ratignolle would say, like, you have to be a good mom and you have to be a good hostess because that's what you're supposed to do. But Edna realizes that you're supposed to do that because of, like, our financial fucking system that exists in. She never says it explicitly, but it's pretty obvious from my perspective. So as far as consumerism goes, you know, she's never happy that Léonce is constantly buying new shit. It's always a facade. They're redoing everything, new decor all the time, and they're just throwing out the old shit. And her rejection of that kind of lifestyle is when she chooses to live in like this old apartment called the Pigeon House. So let's talk about like homes and what they represent, and kind of like the big metaphor at the beginning of a parrot in a cage is like where you live kind of represents what you are, right? So it starts off at a vacation home in Grand Isle where she meets and falls in love with Robert. They're at a vacation home. It's like completely temporary. It's not where they live. So someone else takes care of it. It's like curated by someone else. Interestingly enough, it's curated by Robert and his brother. So that's like the first home we see them in is just like very superficial place of fantasy. It's where you go to play and hang out. Léonce wasn't very attached to that home. He kept leaving. He kept going back to the city and kept chilling at the club. And Edna, she really took advantage of like that home. Like she stayed in the home, but like she used the location of that home to like go to the beach, to learn to swim, to make like a friend that became more than a friend. It, like that home really represented an amazing thing. And we compare it to the end where she returns back to that place and then she goes to die. Like the parrot trapped, she was trapped and upset. On the way to the beach, she actually sees a bird dying with a broken wing, right before she goes in to kill herself. So the vacation house represents the fantasy of life that we want and what she wants. Then we go back to her house, which is what I've discussed plenty, is Léonce is just focused on broadcast. It is a broadcast. It's a signal to the world. The house is not for them to be comfortable or happy in. Who fuck the kids, fuck Edna, like I don't want them to really enjoy the house. It's just to show to other people when they come over and when they're walking by on the street, right? So Edna's never comfortable in it. She's trying to be herself. She goes to like her other friends' houses, you know, Ratignolle. She's got a nice house too. But Reyes, she's got a small apartment with a piano. It's chill and it's lean. It's not fatty and overdone. It's not consumed too much, right? Like the house that Edna lives in with her family, this apartment is just distilled, like pure Reyes when she goes there. And that's what she wants, and that's what she gets at the Pigeon House. Bird reference, wow. I wonder if that's important. I wonder if that's something worth writing about if you were to fucking do this for a project. Anyway, she gets the Pigeon House and she makes it to what she wants. She's able to make it a refuge for her to like slam Arobin, and she actually tries to seduce Robert using that house. And she has her friends come over, but not like all of her social friends. It's like fucking Reyes and Ratignolle. Like that's it. That's who she invites over, and then Arobin and Robert. It's for her. It's her life. Like, no one else has a say in it. It represents who she is. And, you know, commentary on consumerism, like, you don't need a big house to, like, show everyone how great you are. In fact, you can have a quite small house and show everyone how interesting you are, right? Like, and you don't have to show it to everyone. It can be, like, who you want it to. So, long story short, it's kind of like an ambiguous discussion on, like, consumerism, but like it's not like saying that capitalism is inherently bad and materialism is like destroying America. It's not quite to that extent, but it's saying like consumerism kind of destroys the soul. Leonce's integrity is gone. Like his integrity is so far gone that when Edna's like, I think our marriage is pretty much over, we're gonna live a sham for the rest of our lives, he's like, shit, this is gonna look fucking bad. I need to figure out how people think we're still cool. Like, he's gone. His integrity is gone. He does not have a soul anymore. And Edna's just trying to preserve her soul. Her awakening is that she needs to be who she is and not be defined by any one trait one way or another kind of thing. But yeah, a lot of interesting stuff to come from this book. I get so passionate. I remember the first time I read this, I was like, what the fuck? This is really good. Why aren't we all talking about this? There's a lot to think about here. Edna's a really interesting character. Reyes, Ratinil, LeBron, Arabin, they're all really interesting. I actually think the husband, Leonce, is one of the most interesting characters because he just does not get it. He is like a fucking lead wall to society. He will not see that there's inherent problems with his soul and his wife's soul. He just will not see it. It's crazy. It's really interesting. And how he lives his life. And he's a success. Based on, even today, we would look at him and be like, wow, Leonce Pontellier is a good guy. He's not like mad at his wife. He doesn't come home drunk and angry and throwing shit. Like he does it. He does it all for his wife and kids. He just is so oblivious to his wife. Oh, God, it's just so interesting. And the stakes of it are what makes it even more interesting. It's like, yeah, it's not like an abusive home where like she's like gonna be physically a target of violence or anything like that. It's way more nuanced, and I think that gives it so much more power into like commenting on what society and life and expectations are. Is that you don't have like these grand scale stakes. You have these very specific ones, and the motivations are very specific, and it's arguably selfish. I think that's fair to say, but I think this book is trying to say that being selfish is not necessarily a bad thing or necessarily consequential to others, right? Like, you can be a good person and have your kids. You can give your money, you can give your life to your kids, but you can't give your soul to your kids. That's kind of the big takeaway, and that's what everyone was so pissed off about when this book came out. Now, the feminist thing comes in is like people looked at that and they interpreted it, Kate, in discussing or using all of this as a metaphor for women as a political entity. Which is fair. Yeah, I think there's actually a couple of things written that Kate wasn't really an outspoken feminist. She would have been writing this at the time that temperance would have been gaining traction. In about 10, 12 years at this point, women would have the right to vote, I think, in America. I don't know the timeline of that. So she, like, it wouldn't have been a thought that she hadn't thought about. It obviously would have crossed her mind, especially while writing this. But the book is like not about that. It's not about representation or engaging with society in a meaningful way. It's about kind of the development of the self outwards. And that's what makes it really, really interesting. And I can totally sympathize with someone who reads that. And like the first time I read it, I was like, oh, this is a good metaphor for feminism. And reading it the second time and then reading a couple papers on it, it's kind of like, not really. Like it's a good like secondary supporting thing. Like it like represents what women want, like how they exist in a society. Like you can make that case, thus they are like equal kind of thing. But it is really more about the self journey and the expression and all that. I guess I'm going to conclude the video. I just kind of like got really into talking about it. Apologies if it's nonsense. We talk about marriage, we talk about being a parent, we talk about kind of like the 4 forms of like relationship fulfillment: artistic / spiritual, romantic, sexual, financial, and then there's a lot of aspects we can discuss. The feminist side you can sort of argue, but I would say that's probably not like the main driving force of this. The symbols of the bird, the ocean. Personally, I have a deep interest in kind of the deep American South. I like other authors that Kate Chopin really influenced, which would be like Flannery O'Connor's and whatever. That area, especially around New Orleans, like Louisiana, like it's an amazing place. It doesn't really talk about the cultural implications of the location all too much. A lot of other books and movies and music do. New Orleans was like this weird amalgamation of culture that we live in a globalist world, and America itself is a colony of immigrants and all that, but nothing is quite like New Orleans. Like, I would say the only thing of like an amalgamation of culture and interest in music and food and like that's just bonkers. The only thing comparable is Singapore. It is a very interesting place to come from. And there's a lot of other art that I want to associate this with. I'm just going to kind of leave it at one. I was reminded of it because the cover had a very similar color as this album here by Neutral Milk Hotel, In the Airplane Over the Sea. It also kind of has a very subtle and nuanced concept. It's a little more postmodern and metaphorical than I would say The Awakening would be. There's a fucking line in here at the end. She was talking about her relationship with her kids. Oh no, as she was dying. Those of you who know Neutral Milk Hotel, there's a quote, something, how strange it is to be anything at all. It's part of a well-known song. I won't get into Neutral Milk Hotel today. It's kind of a rabbit hole. Has some interesting conspiracies involved. But there's a line here, right before she kills herself, like literally as she's killing herself, where she says, "How strange and awful it seemed to stand naked under the sky. How delicious. She felt like some newborn creature opening its eyes in a familiar world that it had never known. How strange it is to be anything at all." Okay, this book was written almost 100 years before this album came out. I am very curious. I want to meet the songwriters and ask him, or ask them, I know it was mostly one guy named Jeff Mangum, but I still would like to ask the band, that if this fucking book has anything to do with this album, because I guess I didn't mention this. This album was written by a bunch of South Louisiana guys, right? They are kind of from the same place. Now, as I recall, these people are from more inland, so they're not New Orleans exactly. Pretty close. And that fucking line, how strange and awful it seemed to stand naked under the sky, in an album called In the Airplane Over the fucking Sea, how strange it is to be anything at all. It's like the exact same thing. Oh, it's so interesting. I think if you're going to, like, do a comparative essay, you could fucking do it on The Awakening and this. And you read the content of this, or listen to the content of the lyrics of this album, and it is kind of similar. Like, it's more metaphysical, arguably time-traveling. I'm going to leave that for you to figure out. I might do a video on this album itself, because it's just fucking wild. But I just wanted to make that comparison because it's pretty fucking interesting. Anyway, I'm going to give my formal conclusion. I wrote it down. Are you ready for this, the conclusion? Written well before its time, Kate Chopin's The Awakening is often chalked up as an early beacon in the West of what would become modern feminism. Its release was lambasted, and her literary success was minimal during her life. But in its legacy, we see Chopin and her novel's success. But while it does represent the complex identities of women and their roles in society, The Awakening is so much more than that. It is critical of consumerism. It attacks the patriarchy not as an overbearing social system of man versus woman, but as being a product of a shallow and greed-based economic system. The men in Edna's life keep rebounding around and reacting to their profitability and social perception of wealth and social cohesiveness, that she has no choice but to detach from her husband because he's so entrenched in this. She eventually falls in love with Robert LeBron, and she gets associated with Elsie Arabin because their concepts of success in life are a little more tangible and beautiful, but none of them are really enough for what Edna pursues. Edna wants a good life. At the end of the day, that's all she wants. She wants to be happy. And there's so many obstacles in her way that it's not really even feasible. I guess you could say, despite all her rage, she is still just a fucking bird in a cage!
Tell me I'm the only one. Tell me there's no one.
Well, I guess I learned a valuable lesson today from this very book. You can't trust a woman, not a lick of them.
Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat.